I now give the floor to the Secretary.
Too often, there has also been a disconnect between leadership and power. We see remarkable examples of leadership, but they are not usually associated with power.
Maqsadimiz har bir insonning asosiy huquq va erkinliklarini, salomatligi va farovonligini ta'minlaydigan adolatli global tizimni birgalikda yaratishdir.
Kazakhstan is determined to build an economically strong, democratically advanced, and human-oriented listening state. Therefore, we conduct political and economic reforms.
Мы придаем большое значение обеспечению безопасности, экономическому развитию, защите прав человека, верховенству закона и демократии.
Для нашей страны ООН была и останется важнейшим приоритетным партнером. С духом и буквой устава ООН мы сверяем все свои шаги на международной арене. И сегодня в год 75-й годовщины создания Организации Объединенных Наций Туркменистан ответственно заявляет о своей непоколебимой приверженности великим идеалам, заложенным в ее основании.
وابسته به این تاجیکستان با ساختارهای مربوطه سازمان ملل متحد و سازمانهای منطقوی از قبیل اتحاد دولت‌های مستقل، سازمان همکاری شانگهای، سازمان عهدنامه امنیت دست جمعی همکاری سودمند دارد.
The fact that all Central Asian heads of state have spoken in the recent General Assembly shows how important the United Nations is to them. All of them use the opportunity to highlight their main priorities and concerns, most of them with a focus on COVID-19, on Afghanistan, on climate change, and on their domestic reform agendas. I believe that the United Nations is an important platform where the Central Asian states can voice and share their concerns with the international community. I also think that it can be an essential tool to promote implementation of international commitments undertaken by these countries and to assist them with reform. The UN provides a framework for review and assistance with implementation of various international conventions and treaties to which Central Asian states are parties. A main example is the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, giving the UN a fundamental role in promoting human rights in the region. And this is, I think, essential in this region, which remains generally authoritarian and where human rights are widely flouted in several, if not in all states. In this regard, the United Nations offers important tools to contribute to dialogue and to the protection of human rights. For example, the visits by various UN special rapporteurs over the past several years have been very helpful. Uzbekistan hosted the rapporteur on freedom of religion or belief in 2017, and Tashkent took into account several of the recommendations. Other Central Asian states should take, I think, advantage of this assistance. It is also good that the UN and its agencies are present on the ground. In an extremely authoritarian country like Turkmenistan, the presence of a UN office is one of the international community's rare channels for discussion with the government on sensitive topics, although such discussions remain, of course, difficult. Here, however, maybe I should add that some visiting UN representatives haven't been altogether very helpful. For example, the World Health Organization for months in the beginning of this year appeared to validate the Tajikistan government's narrative that Tajikistan was COVID-19 free, while Dushanbe eventually recognized that the country was impacted by the pandemic. And still today, the WHO appears to still endorse Berdi Mohamedov's narrative that Turkmenistan is COVID-19 free, despite having visited the country and faced with overwhelming evidence that the country is severely impacted by the pandemic. Another essential component of UN assistance in promoting human rights is the Human Rights Council and its process of Universal Periodic Review, UPR, of the human rights situation in individual countries, which is held every 3 years. UPR is also one of the rare international platform, like, for example, the annual OSCE Human Dimension Implementation meeting in Warsaw, where NGOs can voice their criticisms and recommendations. A list of recommendations is made at the end of each UPR session, but of course it's then up to the country itself to take advantage of these recommendations and move forward with reform. This is also, of course, not to say that all these tools are equally efficient and without flaws. For example, NGO participation in the UPR or other UN events requires them to go through a stringent vetting and registration process that can be extremely difficult and political. In addition, some Central Asian countries have refused visits by UN rapporteurs or have refused to take on board recommendations of the UN Human Rights Committee into account, as we have seen, for example, with Kyrgyzstan, with the case of the late human rights activist Azimjan Daskarov. And some countries like Turkmenistan have used simple discussions with UN bodies to claim they are making actual progress on reforms, essentially using it for disinformation purposes to deflect criticism. So, to conclude, I believe that the UN is an important platform for Central Asian countries to express their views. It's also an essential tool to assist these countries in respect of their international obligations. However, an important point here is to not allow the UN or other international organizations to be misused as a venue where authoritarian countries can portray themselves as having resolved all of their issues. For example, while Kazakhstan's President Tokayev told the recent UN General Assembly that he wanted to build a truly democratic society, since taking office, actually, repression against freedom of expression and assembly, opponents and journalists who express critical opinions has continued in the country. So the United Nations must continue to play a fundamental role in promoting the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in Central Asia as everywhere else, of course.